On this episode of Locked On Angels, the PECOTA projections were released last week, and it wasn't great for the Halos. So how accurate are they, and can the Halos play above those projections in 2025? Let's find out. It's time to get locked on with Mike and John, and this is Locked On Angels.
You are Locked On Angels, your daily Los Angeles Angels podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Here for you 5 days a week. Thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SiriusXM by searching Locked On Angels. And if you'd like to give back to the Super Halo Bros for all the Super Halo content, here's some things that you can do. Leave us a rate and a review on Apple Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button. And if you're not subscribed already, come over to YouTube, hit that subscription button. We are trying to get to 10K by opening day. We're almost at 9K, so we need your help, and let's get there by opening day. And whether you're watching or listening, come over to YouTube, leave a comment. It's one of the best ways to get in touch with us and be a part of the conversation. And this episode of Locked On Angels is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just download their app or head to FanDuel.com to get started.
Thanks for being here for this episode of Locked On Angels, where it's your team every day. You've got the Frisch Brothers here with you, a.k.a. the Super Halo Bros. My name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
Hey, we've been fans of the Angels for years and years, our whole lives, and so it's a pleasure and a privilege to be the host of Locked On Angels, talking Angels baseball with you Monday through Friday, every single weekday. If you want to be part of the conversation, like Mike said, head on over to YouTube, get in the comment section, because it's the best way to interact with us there. We're back to 5 days a week now that pitchers and catchers are reporting this week, tomorrow, Michael. I can't wait. And so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of great news out of spring training for us to cover and talk about, and I'm sure that we'll hear from some of the players as well. But on today's show, the PECOTA projections were released last week. They were not too kind to the Halos, and we're going to get into the conversation about why that is. Mike, why don't you give us a little background on PECOTA?
Yeah, here's how it works. This is explained by Baseball Prospectus, the people there at Baseball Prospectus. They said that the PECOTA projections are simulations. They're not a pick. Here's the team that's going to win. Here's how many wins they're going to get. It's not even talking about a particular number of games. Rather, what they identify is an estimated range of games that a team might win, and it tells you the average of that fairly wide range. This is, of course, all according to Baseball Prospectus. And so this is their job is to point out the visualizations, what it might look like, and some of the possible outcomes. That's really what this is about. So it can change as things change for the Halos. It can change as we get closer to the season. If somebody gets injured or if somebody looks like they're going to be healthy, all of that can change. So don't be surprised if the team's numbers change. If you're looking at other numbers, don't be surprised if the wins and losses might change. As we get closer to opening day, they'll release a few updates. But the update they gave us last week, Johnny, the estimation that they gave us last week was that the Halos in 2025, with the team that they have right now, they're going to go estimated 76 and 86. Now, I know that that's not a fantastic record. However, it would be an improvement of 13 wins over the previous season. So does this team have 13 wins in them, Johnny? And if you think so, why do you think that?
I think that they do have at least the 13 wins in them. You guys know me. I think they're going to sneak into the playoffs, and I'm going to die on that hill this year. And so prepare to be annoyed with me. But the reason why I think that is because of the talent that they've dropped and the talent that they've added. Now, if you're going to take into consideration PECOTA's projections and the simulations that they run, you have to consider the fact that as it stands, guys that are healthy, like Mike Trout, even Anthony Rendon, right? That's going to definitely contribute in a positive direction. And so I understand why there are 13 more wins in them, as opposed to where they landed at the end of last season with the 63 and 99 record, because they didn't have a lot of those guys. So as it stands, running all the simulations, the reason why they have 13 more wins in them is because of who's currently healthy, right? Trout hasn't hurt himself or anything like that. And so maybe, hopefully he didn't hurt himself during the Super Bowl celebration, the win.
Right.
But that is to say, everybody who's supposed to be here is here, and that accounts for the 13 wins. So I think that's where that projection comes from. Now, there's kind of a wrinkle to that. And what do they have to get right in order to improve by those 13 wins? Mike, what do you say?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that you already mentioned it with Mike Trout, he's got to stay healthy.
Yeah.
And I think Anthony Rendon's got to stay healthy.
Mhm.
Counting on him is not something that the Angels should be doing. It's why Moncada's on this team.
Right.
But counting on Mike Trout is something the Angels should be doing. And they haven't been able to do that for the last 4 or 5 years. And that's where these projections are interesting. And I know that there are those fans that will say, hey, your record is your record. It's who you are. And I somewhat agree with that with the Angels currently. But here's where I disagree. Those 63 wins and 99 losses last year, a big chunk of those 99 losses came when the Angels just decided to put everybody on the IL. They decided to put everybody that, hey, what are we playing for? Let's not continue to put these guys out there. I wonder if Joe Adell would have been on the IL if they were actually competitive. I wonder if they would have done something with other players if they were actually competitive. And so I think what we have to do is not look at last year's record and say that's exactly who they are, because it's not exactly who they are. And one of the reasons why is because of health. They just haven't been healthy. And I know that that's going to be a question this year, and it's going to be a question next year, and it'll be a question in 3 years. It's a question that every team has to wrestle with, and our team especially, because they just haven't stayed healthy. The trends would say that this is going to be a healthy year, because it can't keep being like it was. Can it? Right? Like, that's the question that I'm asking. And I think when you look at, like, we're Niner fans, we're football fans when it comes to NFL. We love the 49ers. And they were a really good team 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Last year's team was not, mainly because nobody could stay on the field. Everybody was hurt. And there's a lot of reasons for that, probably playing into the Super Bowl. Some teams just get really lucky and don't have too many injuries, like the Kansas City Chiefs, right? They're able to hit the Super Bowl all of the time. Same thing was true in baseball, and they play a whole lot more. They play a whole lot more often. And I think that with this Angels team, I would guess that the trends say that they're going to be more healthy this year than they have been in the past for a couple of reasons. One, I think Mike Trout is going to be on the field, and he understands his body more now than maybe he did 4 or 5 years ago.
Fair.
Also, I think the young players, John, having young players helps us and allows us to either, if we're hurt, come back sooner, which is why I think maybe Neto will be back sooner. But also, when you're young, you just bounce back from little, cuts and bruises and scrapes. Right?
I miss those days.
And so that's why I really think that the trends for the Angels this year are they're going to stay healthy. And if they get this 13 win increase, a lot of it is going to be dependent upon the health of Mike Trout and the health of the entire team.
Yeah, and you're going to need to see production from players that should be at least league average this season. I think that's key. Mike, you mentioned health and how that is such an important factor. This is why you get a Yoan Moncada, because you need depth behind Zach Neto and Luis Rengifo. And you can't count on Anthony Rendon, and you need a guy who's been there before. I was just reading about him on Fangraphs, Yoan Moncada. Mike, did you know the Red Sox gave him a $31 million signing bonus, and they had to incur penalties?
The White Sox.
No, the Red Sox.
Because when they signed him, that was right. He was an international pick for them. That's right.
That's right. And he was part of the Chris Sale trade.
Yes.
And so that's what got Chris Sale to the Red Sox. Of course, they won the World Series. So $31 million well spent on the Red Sox part.
Right.
But this was a highly touted prospect. And then he came up to the bigs and he produced, and he's been hurt. And so I think that if you get a healthy season from him, he's going to be at least league average. But again, this is a guy you go to for depth. And when we talk about health, this is what good teams do. They have to have guys who have at least been in the majors and had some modicum of success. That's why I'm not mad about a JD Davis signing. I'm not mad about a Tim Anderson signing. I'm a little hesitant about the glue of the locker room with Tim Anderson if he ends up being on the major league club.
Yeah.
But also I think Ron Washington is the perfect guy to kind of rein that in a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I think that has everything to do with team chemistry. But this is why you have to have major league caliber depth. I'm not going to say quality depth because these guys might be under league average, but this is why you go to, a few years ago, it was Eduardo Escobar
Yeah.
and Mike Moustakas,
Yeah.
right? And they contributed at a small level. Mike Moustakas didn't light up the scorecard often, but he did have a big game here and there. And he's a capable guy at the corners in the infield. I think the same can be said for Yoan Moncada. He's going to play third base. He's going to provide some depth. And I think that is why you sign these kinds of guys, so that you're not going to the minor leaguer who's only had 31 plate appearances in the majors, or even worse, you go to somebody in your minor league system who's not quite ready to be there yet because you're rushing his development or whatnot. So health is a big question. I think production in terms of guys being league average. Kikuchi is going to need to be the Kikuchi from the Astros. I believe that he will be, because he made fundamental changes rather than just tweaks to his delivery.
Yeah.
Soriano and Anderson got to hit double-digit wins. Like there's a lot to be asked of from this team, right?
Yeah, I think when it comes to pitching, there's a lot of what ifs when it comes to Soriano and Detmers. If they are able to have really solid seasons, average seasons, not fall off the cliff like Detmers did, then that's going to be a benefit to this team.
Yeah,
but
I'm not worried about Soriano. Like, I'm more worried about Detmers than Soriano.
Absolutely.
For sure.
But I think that the two linchpins, John, are Kikuchi and are Tyler Anderson. These two guys have to be who they've been the last couple of years, getting to 170, 180 innings pitched, and they have to be quality starts. They have to have more quality starts than terrible starts. And I would say for Kikuchi and for Anderson, if they're starting 31, 32 times, then they're going to need 25 to 27. I'm in this game. We're close. I have a lead. I've left with a lead type of starts. And if they do that, then I think what it does for the rest of the pitching staff, a Soriano, who I think is leaning in that direction, and then maybe a Kyle Hendricks or maybe a Jack Kohanowitz or maybe a Reed Detmers, it gives them a standard to pursue instead of them being the guy like, man, I have to have all the weight on me. I have to figure this out. And so Kikuchi and Anderson, they just need to be what they've been the last couple of years. I think Anderson last year in the first half, that's the Anderson that we want. Kikuchi with the Astros, that's the Kikuchi that we want. If they can do that, John, I think that 13 wins is easily achievable for this team.
It's got to be the team that you signed at day one spring training, right? It's got to be the team that comes in on opening day in order to meet these projections. And we know there's going to be injuries. There's going to be guys going up and down. There's going to be bullpen moves. There's going to be options. Some guys might not even make it to the opening day roster by spring training. We've seen that with like Justin Upton, right?
Yeah.
He was in spring training and then he didn't make the team. They cut him. So there's a lot of variations that can take place. But as it stands, 76 and 86 is the PECOTA projections. And we're going to continue our conversation. Thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. Coming up on the show, how accurate are these projections? Well, we're going to take a look at what they have to say. And then later on, we'll look at the player projections, the individual projections, and take the over or the under. We're going to get into all of that coming right up.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. It's the middle of the NBA season, and they're ramping up for the playoffs, and there's a lot of trades that have just happened, and you can get in on all of the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, and even if you miss the opening tip-off, you can check out the game mid-game or maybe make some bets on the fourth quarter comeback, which in the NBA, it's usually in the third quarter. You'll be down by 20, and they come back. So those games are always really close, even if there's a huge deficit, especially with those really good teams. And I love FanDuel because they have a lot of really good betting features to make every moment exciting. Right now, New customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, FanDuel.com. And then you can, as a new customer, get $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
This is the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. And again, thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. It feels good to be back to 5 days a week as we ramp up for the season. I'm excited. I know that, it can be pretty depressing, especially if you look at the record and say, this is who they are. But I think that they are much more capable than what they were able to put out there. Like you said, Mike, they put a lot of guys on the IL just to say, you know what, we're not going to push it. We're not going to risk it. And especially when you do that, then you have your Eric Wagamans and your Nico Cavadases right up with the team. And that's not who you came into the season believing was going to be on the team.
Right.
Nobody knew who Nico Cavades was before the season started. Right. And so I think that has a lot to do with our conversation about the PECOTA projections. And we want to talk about how accurate these projections have been in the past. And starting with our Angels, they've actually been wrong in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And here's what we mean by that. They gave the Halos more wins than the Halos actually got in the last 6 years. For example, they estimated the Halos would win 74 games. They won 63.
For last year, yep.
For last year. In 2023, it was estimated they would win 86 games. They won 73.
Yeah.
In fact, PECOTA has estimated the Halos would win on average 75 games in the last 6 years. The Angels on average have won 64 games, but that does include 2020 where they won 26 games. So that kind of brings it down a little bit. If we took out 2020, the Halos averaged 71.6 wins in a season. PECOTA estimates that the Halos would win 83.2 games in the last 5 seasons. And a reminder, this is an estimate. Estimates can be wrong, as we've learned. In 2024, here's a good example. Kansas City was projected at 70 wins.
Right.
They ended up winning 86 games. And remember, they went from 56 in 2023 and won 30 more games last season.
Yeah.
And that got them into the playoffs. And I think the Angels, to me, can have that same kind of trajectory. I know you have to add, so many wins above replacement, and so many guys have to contribute a certain way. But think about what these estimates teach us. Mike, what do you say?
Yeah, first, these estimates don't consider injuries. And we talked a bit about this in the first segment. The Halos have had so many injuries, especially with their best players and their second-tier players over the last 5 years. So these estimates don't consider what might happen in the season. They're just looking at the roster as is. It's why PECOTA, the baseball perspective people, are saying, hey, these will change as we get closer to the regular season, depending on what happens. Also, the thing that it doesn't consider is it talks about like what the potential is of this team. And it uses what happened in previous seasons with previous numbers from all the players to what will happen. So here's what we learned from PECOTA and Baseball Prospectus about the Angels in the last 5 years. Without injuries, they had really good potential, didn't they, Johnny? PECOTA estimated that the Angels would have won 86 games in 2023. They would have just missed the third wild card spot that year because the Blue Jays won 89 games. They would have won 88 games, according to PECOTA, in 2022, which would have gotten them the third wild card spot. And then they would have won 87 games, according to PECOTA, in 2021, and they would have just missed the third wild card spot. I bring all of that up because I want to get your longtime Angel perspective here as a fan. That would have drastically changed the narrative around this team if, John, they had 89 wins, 88 wins, and 87 wins in 3 consecutive years. That would have drastically changed everything for this team and would have drastically changed how people view this team, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in that spot where you are 3 games out from a playoff team, from a wild card spot. That changes a lot
Yeah.
in terms of the narrative around this team, because you're right there. And the problem is they haven't been right there in the last few seasons. Mike, I think about the 22 team, nobody would have guessed 2 things: that Taylor Ward would have had the breakout that he was having,
Yeah.
and that they would have gone on a 14-game losing streak where they just couldn't get it together. That
Right.
changes everything. And so that's why, actually, before I continue, let me go to 2023. Shohei Ohtani hurting his arm and not being able to pitch the rest of the season. And then eventually, sitting out the last few weeks of that season. Man, his presence in the lineup changes a lot for the team.
Right.
And also, remember, back in 2022, when they were on that terrible losing streak, Ohtani was the streak stopper. He's the one who helped them get the wins. And in 2023, he was having a fantastic pitching season. I know the beginning of the season was a little bit rough by Ohtani standards, but you have to consider that these teams were very different. They had a very different makeup coming into the season versus how they ended up at the end of the season. So that's why, I guess I'll say this. The reason why I'm confident that the Angels can have such a big swing is because there was so much room for, I don't want to say room for error. I guess what I mean to say is there's room for anything to happen with this team. And so I look at their projections. I think, 76, that's a modest example, a modest projection.
Yeah.
But I feel like, 10 more wins get you close to a third wild card spot, especially with the way things have been the last few seasons with that third spot, and teams, aren't exactly lighting up the world all the time. Like I know the Diamondbacks got into the World Series and they had an 80 some odd win season to get there. And so I guess what I mean to say is, like, there's such a swing in both directions. Now, granted, they've been swinging in the wrong direction the last few years.
Yeah.
I think that this is a different team. And I think the makeup of this team is going to be very interesting to watch in 2025 because there is a better floor here. I think when you improve the floor and you improve the least that you can do, I think when you improve that, there's so much room for improvement above that, where you might get a surprising season out of Nolan Shawnoel, right? You might get a season out of Joe Adell where you're like, dang, Joe Adell finally found it.
Yeah.
And so you have to take that into consideration. You also have to take into consideration Mike Trout might not play 140 games. And that's a reality that we have to deal with. I go back to your question about the narrative. If these guys had actually played up to their PECOTA projections, we're looking at a different team that's like, man, they're just on the cusp. If they only signed one guy, and maybe that even happens too. Like if they play up to their projections and get into a wild card spot in 2022 where they win 88 games, the next year they come out in 2023, they've signed an ace because they're like, oh, you know what we were missing? We were missing an ace. Or you know what we were missing? We were missing a big lefty bat, right? Like I think that narrative changes if the Angels measure up to their projections. How do you feel about the narrative around this team had they met those?
Here's what's interesting, and here's a thought that I had, was that if they had met those numbers, 89 wins, 88 wins, 87 wins, then Artie's philosophy, getting that big bat, getting that big player, would have actually made sense for this team, right? Sure. He would have been a really good owner, and his narrative probably would have been a lot different than what it is currently, because they would have been on the cusp. They would have been on the verge. And so because we've been so bad, this sounds exciting. Now, I also think that the narrative around the team at that time and currently, if they had won these games, would be, Artie never does enough to get us into the play. Artie never does enough to get us to the Artie, right? And so, and I get it. We're fans. We're going to have those moments. But I think that would be a much better conversation for us to have, that we're almost on the cusp of a playoff, or we were in the playoff, and what happened? Well, what happened was the bullpen couldn't carry us like the Dodgers bullpen did last year. Or what happened? Well, we didn't have the hitters like we could have had, and we need an extra bat. So a Soler move would have made sense, right? Those are conversations that I think all Angel fans, including myself, long to have instead of the conversations that we're having where, man, I really think, I really hope, I'm really kind of considering that maybe this would be good, right? We want to have some tangible statistics and some tangible results to be able to have a really, I think, reasonable conversation about this team, which is why I love what you're saying about getting to the playoffs. I don't know if I agree with you fully, but I think what you're saying is here's some reasonable, tangible metrics. The problem is we just don't have any evidence from the last 10 years. Right here, John tells me that this is a bit of evidence that they've put together some teams that, according to the baseball minds and the people that pay attention to the stats, they should have been in the race. They should have been a part of it. And so, again, it comes back to health for this team. You got to stay healthy. You got to remain healthy. I wonder even if the narrative around this team would have been different because Ron Washington probably wouldn't be here. It probably would have been a Phil Nevin, or it probably would have been
Joe Madden,
Joe Madden, right? Like, they probably wouldn't have gotten rid of him. And I wonder what a Joe Madden Angels team would have been like, say they had won all of these games and they had been on the cusp of that. I wonder if there would have been a conversation about like, we need to get a really good manager that can get us over the hump. Joe can get us there, but he can't win the big one, right? And so there's a lot of what ifs when it comes to if the Angels would have won. Gosh, I would have loved to have had those conversations than many of the conversations we've had over the last couple of years.
I can tell you what it would have looked like if Joe Madden was here. It would have been llamas in the dugout and clowns in the locker room and
everybody getting face tattoos
and a mohawk. So, Mike, I think it's important to look at the individual player projections that PECOTA has put out because it gives us a sense of where these guys might stand. Again, it's based on history, right? It's based on track record. That's also, before we jump into these, because it's going to be fun to look at these and take the over and unders. And we invite you to be part of that conversation too. So get in the comments section. But that's also why I think about the Royals from 2023 to 2024. So many guys stepped up last season.
Yeah.
And so many of their young players stepped up from 2023. Now, I know you've got Bobby Witt carrying the brunt of their production last season, but then you have, Salvi Perez having a monster season. I guess what I mean to say is like, for as much as the Angels are capable of falling under their projections, everything goes wrong, everybody gets hurt. I think that you have to consider that for as possible as it is for everything to go wrong, it's just as equally possible for things to go right. Where you get a surprising season out of a Nolan Shawnuel, a Joe Adell, maybe even a Mickey Moniak, right? The coin flip here is essentially that. I think it's a coin flip. It's things can go really right just as easily as things can go really wrong. Now, all of us have been battered and bruised and heartbroken because things have gone wrong more often than not. But I still think that every season you have a chance where things are just as capable of going wrong as they are going right. So I think that is kind of how it went with the Royals. Now, they signed some capable starters, Michael Wacha, obviously Seth Lugo had a huge season. Who would have projected Seth Lugo to have a Cy Young season?
Right. And here's the thing. It's a friend of mine. He's a Royals fan, so he speaks for everybody, right? And so it's my bias. But one of the things that he said to me was before they entered last season, there wasn't a lot of excitement. The narrative around the team was like, you got Seth Lugo and you got Michael Wacha, and they're not fantastic. And man, this team's really going to have to outperform themselves. And then when they won 86 games, he said the whole narrative almost ripped my earphones out. The whole narrative changed around the team. And he said it was because they all played kind of above their pay grade. They played above who they are. Now, the narrative right now is, can we continue to do that? And that's the same thing around our team. Can the Angels actually do that? So, John, let's start with the projections for Mike Trout. Right now, they're saying, and this is an estimation, right, that he will play 125 games. He'll have 539 plate appearances. He'll hit 30 home runs, hit 255, have a 353 on base, a 506 slugging, a 139 weighted runs created plus, and a 4.2 WAR. Now, first of all, those are pretty good numbers. Maybe Mike Trout when he first came up type of numbers, but I think the on-base percentage is right on. I think the slugging percentage is right on, and I think the 30 home runs is right on. So I wonder if you would take the over on these numbers, or would you take these numbers, or maybe take the under on these numbers?
I'm going to take the over on both average and on-base percentage, Mike, because I was looking at his 2018 season because I said, how did he perform after the Eagles won the won the Super Bowl in 2018? Man, he led the league in on-base percentage and OPS.
Yep.
And it was insane. And so I think Mike can be a walk machine, and I think that he's going to continue that into this season. The games, 125 games, man, I would almost just say he's going to play 125 games. I wouldn't take an over or an under on that one. How about Yusei Kikuchi? 31 starts, 169 innings pitched, 175 2/3 last year, a 26.6% K rate, a 7.6% walk rate, an ERA of 3.92, whereas last year it was 4.05. Are you taking the over or under on those numbers, Mike, for Yusei Kikuchi?
I'm gonna take a couple of these numbers. I'm gonna sit on the numbers, but I think for the innings pitched, I'm gonna sit on those numbers. But I think that we could probably see a better K rate. I think we'll probably see what he did last year. He had a 6 walk percentage instead of a 7.6 is what they're projecting. And I think that his ERA will continue to drop. And I think that it's because of what he learned with the Astros last season. So I'm going to take some overs on some of those. What about Logan O'Hoppe, John? 115 games is what they're projecting. 462 plate appearances, 20 home runs, a 241 batting average, 313 on base, a 430 slugging with a weighted runs created plus of 109. You taking over? You sitting on that, or you taking the under?
I'm going to take over on the number of games. 115 is too low. And I think the reason why that's in there is because of his 2023 shortened season with the injury.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing for Zach Neto, 134 games. Now he is coming back from that shoulder injury, so that might be right in line. He might miss, 28 games or so. That's some quick math for you.
Yeah.
But with Logan O'Hoppe, I like the numbers there. I would take a little bit more on the average. I think I would take a little bit more on the weighted runs created plus above 109, because I think that he is going to create the runs for this team. So I'm going to take over on that and the games played. Zach Neto, I think 134 might be right in line, especially with that shoulder injury. But the fact that he could hit 22 home runs, a 252 average, that all feels pretty good to me. I love that 442 slugging, a 116 weighted runs created plus. I think that they kind of nailed it with Zach Neto. And I think that even incorporating his 2023 season, which wasn't as good as 2024, I think that these numbers are really kind of right in line with what Zach Neto could do.
Hey, thanks for making Locked On Angels your first listen of the day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB with our friend Sully. You can find his show on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey, give us a follow on Twitter at Locked On Angels and at Super Halo Bros on Twitter and Instagram. Mike, what do we have on deck for tomorrow's show?
Well, the Angels were ranked dead last in their minor league prospects, and that caused a whole lot of conversation. And we're going to talk about that and what it means and if it might be inaccurate tomorrow on Locked On Angels.
All right, just nothing but great conversations happening over here about the positive Angels, right? Thanks for being here, everybody. We appreciate you being here. Until tomorrow's show, my name is John, and that's my brother Mike.
And my name is Mike, and that's my brother John.
Thanks for being here with us, everybody, and we'll see you back here on Wednesday.
They're ranked dead last because they can't develop anybody. They don't have any good players. They thought Art is going to sell the team.
Is that you in the comment section?